Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. It's AGM season, the time when shareholders hear directly from the executives and boards running the companies they invest in and can put their own questions to them as well. Importantly, it's also an opportunity for investors to vote on matters affecting the company. In many cases, shareholders don't attend or vote in person, instead appointing a proxy to do it for them. And that's where groups like the Australian Shareholders Association come in. As far as AGMs go, this is a big week. Telstra is holding its annual get-together today. They've got more than 1 million shareholders, Telstra. Tomorrow's Commonwealth Bank. Steven Mabb is the chair of the Australian Shareholders Association. Stephen, welcome to Fear and Greed.
G'day, Sean. Thanks very much for having me.
Why is voting so important? So I'm a small retail shareholder. Why should I vote?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. And the truth is most people don't vote because it's pretty hard and it's pretty complicated and you've got to read this big, difficult report. But why should you vote? Because if you don't, what happens is the chair of the meeting normally will vote your shareholding for you. And often that's not necessarily going to be in your best interest. If the chair or the board want to do something that maybe isn't great for you as an individual shareholder, it's probably better to vote. And if you're not going to vote, to allocate your proxy to someone that would do that for you. It all sounds a bit complicated, but basically it just means that you're giving someone else the right to vote for you on that particular day.
So just go into that a little bit more. So let's say I'm not going to turn up on the day and for some reason I can't do it remotely. That might be because I can't do it or the company's not providing those services. But I do want to have a say, and I do know that there are proxy firms and organisations that can help me out. So just explain how that works.
Yeah, so there's what we call the big proxy advisors, and they basically charge a fee and advise, big super funds or big fund managers, etc., on how they should vote if those folks aren't inclined to figure it out for themselves. It's a great service, but it's expensive. It's not something the average person can access. So that's really where the Shareholders Association comes in. We've got a couple of hundred volunteers all around the country that are individual shareholders themselves, and they'll dig into the annual report, they'll dig into the resolutions that are being put to shareholders at the AGM or the AGM and work out what is in your best interest as an individual shareholder. So from there, when you get your notice of meeting or the email or the letter in the mail that says, hey, the AGM's coming up, it's time to vote, all you really need to do is write in Australian Shareholders Association in the proxy box. And then the share registry will get that information from you. We don't know who you are. It's all anonymous. We just get a big report at the end of the process where the share registry says to us, this is how many votes you've been allocated or how many shareholdings you've been allocated. And we go to the meeting. We'll vote accordingly and also write up a report after the meeting as well and let everyone know how it went. And basically the way we're voting is figured out by our team of volunteers across the country and our management team. And again, they're really looking at, is what's being put to you in your best interest as a small shareholder? Is it a good board? Is it a fair, remuneration plan for the management team? If they're raising capital, have they treated you fairly? All those kind of things. Sometimes it's grey, but most of the time, a bit like Fear and Greed, we try and make it black and white wherever we can. So that's basically all that's involved.
Oh, excellent use of the tagline. So just tell me, with the Shareholders Association, so how many AGMs do you cover in a year?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. We'd love to cover, every listed company, but unfortunately, most of our work's done by volunteers. So most years we cover around 200 to 300 companies in some format. Typically, it's the biggest companies that we prioritise because that's where you have the most shareholders and the most amount of money invested. And then once we run out of volunteers, that's when it starts to cut off. But basically, that top 200 to 300 companies most years is who we'll cover and we'll vote and we'll write reports on, and they're all free to access on our website. You don't even need to be a member to give us your vote if you're not voting yourself, and you can also access those reports on the website and have a look at it all for free to make sure you're happy with how we're planning to vote if you're inclined.
I mean, you gave us a plug. I'm giving you a plug because it is definitely a fantastic service. If you're a retail shareholder, it's worth, if nothing else, just going to the website and having a look. So what are some of the key themes you're seeing at AGMs? What do you expect to see this year? There's been plenty about remuneration, obviously, in the last couple of years. Do you expect that to continue? What else do you expect to see?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, remuneration's always a big one. Every year, there's a focus on remuneration, and there'll be a handful of companies that maybe have remuneration plans that aren't fair or aren't being allocated fairly in our view. So we'll probably vote against some remuneration reports at those companies where we don't think things are being done in the right way. That's always a theme. The directors are the other big one. Shareholders get to vote on directors, whether you want them elected or not, or re-elected. And we look at that really closely every year because the way that a board works and the role of a board is really important to an independent or a regular shareholder. You want to make sure that those directors are looking after all of the stakeholders, not just the management team or maybe the major shareholders. So we look at the director elections really closely, and of course we'll be doing that again this year.
Stay with me, Stephen, and we'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Steven Mabb, Chair of the Australian Shareholders Association. Okay, what about the way that AGMs changed during COVID? They all went online, and at the time I was working for a big corporate, and the running around we had to do to try and ensure that we could get the AGM out to shareholders. Has that remained that way? It just seems there's a bit of a shift, though, back to the in-person AGMs.
Yeah, that's right. Everyone had to go online during COVID, obviously, and I know ASIC relaxed the rules a little bit during that period so that companies could do that, even if it wasn't in their constitutions. But we have seen, a return to in-person meetings, which is great. We love in-person meetings. We want to make sure that shareholders can still turn up and talk to their boards and their management teams at a meeting at least once a year. But what we've also seen is the companies dropping some of the online part of it, either only holding it as a webcast where you can just view what's happening but not actually vote or question in real time, or maybe getting rid of the online portion altogether and only having the physical meeting. We don't think that's great. There's a lot of AGMs happening at the moment, as you know. So even if you're inclined to go to every AGM in person, sometimes it's just not possible because they're on the same day at the same time in two different locations. And secondly, there's a lot of people that don't want to travel all across the country to an AGM for 1 or 2 hours. So we love the hybrid meeting. That's where you have the online meeting, of course, but you also have the ability to join the meeting online, vote, ask questions online as well, and participate, wherever you are in Australia. ASA runs those kind of meetings every year. We're only a small not-for-profit. It's not that hard. It's not that expensive. So we're really pushing the companies hard to continue the hybrid meeting and make sure that they allow our shareholders to participate all across Australia, wherever they are, either in person or at home on their computers.
Broadly, do you think corporate Australia is doing a good job looking after all investors? And I suppose my emphasis on all means retail investors rather than just institutional investors.
Yeah, look, we've got around 2,000 listed companies in Australia. So, of course, with a number that big, you're going to have some folks that are doing it well and then others that maybe aren't. Obviously, the bigger the companies get, generally speaking, the better their governance gets, the better they communicate, the better that they treat their retail shareholders. Where we tend to see some of the biggest gaps. So when you've had a small company that's growing very quickly, maybe its product or its service has got pretty hot and it's rapidly shot up, the market cap. And then you'll start to, get some more coverage and we'll maybe cover them for the first time. And there's often a bit of work to do there where their board or their remuneration or their capital raising process hasn't been great. But we find most of the companies are pretty responsive when the ASA starts to engage with them. They at least are willing to listen and hear us out, and where it makes sense for them to make those changes over time. So even with those kind of mid or smaller cap companies, I guess you'd say, we do see progress when you start to engage with them. It's not always intentional that they're not treating their retail shareholders as well as they could. Sometimes it's just that they haven't really engaged with them. And we understand it's hard. If you've got 1 million shareholders like Telstra does, for example, you can't sit down and speak to them all individually. And that's where the Shareholders Association can come in as a bit of a voice and a centralised voice to represent that group with the company.
So Telstra's the biggest one, I suppose, and Commonwealth Bank, Woolies would be pretty big. I mean, which are the biggest AGMs in terms of people who use the Shareholders Association?
Yeah, they are. Telstra's got hundreds of thousands of retail shareholders, as do the big banks, as does BHP, as does Rio Tinto. The bigger the company gets, generally, the more retail shareholders they have. And it is AGM season, so there's lots of those meetings going on at the moment. If you go to one of those really big AGMs, you'll often see hundreds and hundreds of people in the audience. Most people don't ask questions, so that's where the ASA jumps in again and tries to ask questions at the meeting to get the answers on record and represent retail shareholders that have both given us their proxy, but also other retail shareholders that maybe aren't either there or confident enough to get up and ask a question of the chair.
Final question, Steven. Which AGM has the best food afterwards?
That is a great question. I haven't been to them all. I would say Nick Scali's is pretty good. I was at the Nick Scali AGM last year. Small size, or not small, it's a mid-cap furniture retailer. They put on a fantastic spread. But I haven't been to every AGM in the country, so it's not a fully qualified answer.
Fair enough. Steven, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having us, Sean.
That was Steven Mabb, Chair of the Australian Shareholders Association. This is the Fear and Greed Business Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.